Hello everybody, welcome back to the AJ Speed Shop YouTube channel. Today I'm coming to you with the first Ford technical video of the series that I'll be doing in the future. And the one that I'm going to be doing today is one that will affect every single one of you Foxbody owners out there. This is the stuff that will leave you stranded. And I'm talking about the Ford ignition system. And for those who are not familiar with the Ford TFI distributors, there are a few items in those distributors that can leave you stranded. One of the most notable is the ignition module. The next one is the PIP sensor, which is the pickup sensor inside of the distributor, and of course your ignition coil. And a lot of these are often misdiagnosed whenever you're broke down on the side of the road. Most people almost always think it's a module. When in turn, it can very well be a module a lot of the time, but it is also likely to be the PIP sensor inside the distributor. And the problem with that is not an easy fix on the side of the road. So I'm going to go through a few things in this video, explain the differences of different modules, different PIP sensors, how to install them, and how to build a distributor that will be reliable for you for many years to come. Let's get started. Okay guys, I'm going to start out with a little distributor 101. For those that may not be real familiar with distributors, the Ford TFI distributor has what's called the control module. That is this gray box right here. Okay, and that part is well known to fail, and the replacement modules that you can get at auto parts stores are also very well known to fail. Most of these things are all made in China, and they can give you erratic running conditions or just not run at all. So generally most experts say to stick with the Ford Motorcraft brand ignition modules. You can still get those new. This is one of those modules right here. And let me show you the part number for an actual Ford ignition module made by Motorcraft. And these are arguably not as good as the original modules were when they were new, but it's the best that we've got for right now. This is what this particular module looks like. And you will of course put your dielectric grease on the back side of the module right here before you install it on your distributor. So that is the module portion. That's a high failure rate item. Most old school Foxbody guys will actually keep spare modules in their glove boxes or in a tool bag or something in the car. And they take a very small socket to replace. It's actually a 532 or a 5/32 socket, but it has to be a thin wall socket. There's actually a special tool that you can buy to help install those. So if you do get broke down on the side of the road, it's good to keep that module, some dielectric grease, and the tool with you so you can change that on the side of the road. And the next portion of the distributor that is likely to cause you problems, not as much so as the module, but that is the pickup sensor, otherwise known as the PIP. And that is down in here. It's this white part. I'm hoping you can pick that up where my finger's at. And what that does is when this ignition rotor and reluctor wheel spins, and it creates the magnetic field across that PIP sensor, that's what sends the signal to the module to create the spark, and in turn go to the coil. So those pickup sensors are also notorious for going bad. And just like with the module, most of the aftermarket PIP sensors are not that good. And they typically do not last, or they will cause erratic run behavior. And unfortunately, Ford Motorcraft no longer makes those. However, you can still find them. You can search eBay. there's various stores online that still have a selection of NOS PIP sensors. And this is the number. They call it a stator, but that is actually just another term for the PIP sensor. And I'll show you, this is another brand new one right here to show you what an actual Ford one is supposed to look like compared to an aftermarket one. So if you were lucky enough to find one of these, this Ford PIP sensor will be blue. And it's hard to make it out in the camera here, but there's actual Ford part number across this portion of the sensor and the actual sensor itself. So you can also find these on eBay if you search around. There is some people that are sitting on supplies of NOS stock of these. I usually try to buy 2 or 3 at a time when I do find them. And it's a good item to have if you're going to want to build a new distributor or something along those lines for your car. Now, this PIP sensor right here is your typical remanufactured distributor PIP sensor. This is what comes in parts store distributors, like distributors from O'Reilly's or AutoZone, or maybe the ones from LMR. And they do work. I have ran one. I didn't run it for very long, but they do work. But the reliability is questionable with these. So if you're going to rebuild your original Motorcraft distributor, you are definitely best off putting in the effort to find the original NOS PIP sensor. Also, another component that is known to cause failure that many of you will be aware of is the ignition coil. Here is a Ford Motorcraft ignition coil. These are also a pretty high failure rate, even the Motorcraft ones. So I do keep a spare in the trunk of my car. I actually keep a spare module, a spare ECU, and a spare coil. Those are the things that have all left me stranded in my Foxbody. So I have here a distributor broke down just to demonstrate a few things and show you what I'm going to do today. So this is an original Ford Motorcraft distributor. It's actually the original one out of my SSP car. And of course the shaft, lower distributor cap, and the gear. So if you're wanting to rebuild your distributor to put the new PIP sensor in, you have to break the distributor this far down to do so. And I'm actually going to demonstrate this for you on this brand new O'Reilly's distributor. I believe this was a WAI brand distributor. And they're pretty cheap. They're only about 95 bucks. But what I like to do, I like to get these distributors brand new because the shaft in play is very minimal. And the specifications are pretty tight on them, and we will measure that here shortly. But what I like to do is buy these brand new distributors, I'll take them apart, and I swap all Ford electronics into them. And then they will be reliable. You can also rebuild your original Ford distributor, but what tends to happen with these distributors, they're so old and they've got so many miles on them that they'll tend to have a lot of shaft play in the distributors. And you are supposed to have some up and down play, about 30 thousandths worth on average, but you're not supposed to have any radial play side to side on the shaft. And all of these Ford distributors I've come across, the original Ford distributors, all have a pretty noticeable amount of shaft play versus these O'Reilly distributors or any new distributor. They are very tight. There is no shaft play, just the up and down play, which the range, I believe, is 20 to 35 thousandths. And we're going to measure this one shortly to see what it is. But this one has the required play in and out, but the radial play, there is none. I cannot move this from side to side at all. And that's what you want. So the only problem with rebuilding your original distributor is if it's got a couple 100,000 miles on it, the bushings inside of it are going to be worn out. The shaft is going to have some wear on it, and all this is going to loosen up when it's all together and create that excessive shaft play in the bottom of the distributor. So does it really hurt anything? Probably not. It would or possibly could create more wear on your distributor gear and in turn on your camshaft gear. But what I like to do is I just like to start out with a brand new one myself. Brand new shaft, brand new housing. These are not remanufactured. These are actually brand new. And the electronics are really the only weak parts in them. And this one, I mean, these things spin really smooth and very precise, a lot more so than some of the rebuilt motorcraft distributors like from Cardone. I have gotten 2 distributors from Cardone that are supposedly highly recommended in the Foxbody community, but both of the ones I had were total junk. They had used parts in them, used electronics in them, and they both had a lot of radial play. So what I have done is I built one of these O'Reilly's distributors just like this. I put an original Ford gear on it off of my original motorcraft distributor, but I put a blue Ford PIP sensor in it, and I actually found an NOS module, an actual original Ford module from eBay. Let's see if I can get that to zoom in on there for you. And this is what I used for a module as opposed to using the motorcraft one. This thing is probably from like the late 90s, I believe. So back when Ford was, still making them. And that is actually what I am running in my car right now. You can see, possibly, if I can zoom in on it right there. That is a brand new NOS Ford module and a brand new O'Reilly's distributor that has all brand new Ford stuff in there. So that's how I like to do it. This has been the most reliable distributor I've had thus far, and I expect this thing to last for many, many years. So that said, I've bought another O'Reilly's distributor for an upcoming engine build that I'll be doing, and I wanted to have a completely separate distributor. So I'm going to start out with this brand new distributor. We are going to measure the clearances, the shaft play, and then we're going to take it apart and install some Ford electronics in it. Now, the problem with taking these apart is on all the Ford distributors, the gear is pressed on to the shaft. So you can knock the roll pin out, but the gear is press fit onto the shaft. So you'll have to use a gear puller, and I like to use a little heat. I'll heat it up with a torch and use a gear puller and pull it off. What I have found with these O'Reilly's distributors is they are not press fit, or at least the other one was not that I had. So when we knock this pin out, we will be able to slide this gear off, hopefully, and take the distributor apart to install the new pickup sensor and reassemble everything, and we'll measure the clearances. There's a certain spec that we're supposed to have. We will also measure that. It's a depth spec from the seat flange right here on the distributor housing to the bottom of the gear. And that is what dictates how much up and down play we have and where this thing sits on the shelf inside the engine. So you'll have your gear will interface with the cam gear, but then you also have this flat surface on the bottom right here that sits on a floor, so to speak, in the middle of a 302 block. And so if you don't have this clearance set right, you will either have a problem with the distributor not dropping all the way into the engine and the flange sticking up above the top of the block, or you can have it drop too far in to where when the flange is flush on the block and the gear might contact the floor too much, and you can get irregular wear on the bottom of the gear here. Or if it's too shallow, the gear will not interface with the cam gear enough, and it would only potentially be halfway engaged into the cam gear and cause irregular wear there. So there's an actual spec from here to here. It's right around 4.00 to 4.03, and we will check this one. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the up and down play, which is supposed to be about 20 to 35 thousandths. So we'll rig this thing up in the vise and we'll start taking some measurements and see what we've got. Okay, here I have the distributor rigged up so we can measure the free play. And the spec on this free play is reported to be 20 thousandths to 35 thousandths. So let's see what we got here. I've got it zeroed out. Let's see what we got. About 20. So this one has right at 20 thousandths free play, which is right on the tight end of the range, but it's right where it's supposed to be. So it looks like this distributor is going to be right what we need. A lot of these remanufactured or new Chinese distributors are reported to have very little free play, and they can cause problems. So you're supposed to have some play in there. So that's definitely something you need to take a measure of. If for some reason, and you put this thing in the car or you put it in the engine and you did not have any free play, your distributor can get in a bind, especially once you tighten down on the collar bolt that holds the distributor housing to the block. If you don't have free play in that shaft, you're going to put that shaft in a bind and run the risk of breaking the shaft or breaking your oil pump shaft or excessively wearing the gears on the cam gear and the distributor gear. So always make sure to check this free spec on any distributor that you get and make sure you got at least 20 thousandths or so. And I've measured a few others. I had one Motorcraft distributor, an old Motorcraft distributor, that had 60 thousandths worth of play. Is that going to hurt anything? Probably not. I would rather have more than not enough as far as up and down in play. But the side play, the radial play down here, the side-to-side shaft, you do not want any play there. And this one has got none. A lot of the distributors I've seen that I've messed with so far have all had small amounts of play there. Some of them are pretty excessive. And one of them I rigged up and it had about 30 thousandths worth of shaft play in it. So that distributor ended up in the scrap pile. So let's get ready to measure the gear depth range on this one, and then we'll get ready to take it apart. Okay, the next critical measurement that we have to check to make sure that everything is gonna be safe with this thing is the in play on the distributor shaft / the distributor gear pinion depth. So the way we want to measure this is the spec on this is from this point here on the bottom of the mounting flange. It sits up on top of the block to the bottom of the gear. The base of the gear that touches the floor inside the block is supposed to be 4.00 to 4.038 inches. So, and you want to check that with the gear and the shaft pulled all the way out. So you can push it in and you have that 20 thousandths in play that we just measured a little while ago. So we want to take that out and make sure all the slack is taken out of that. And then we want to take our caliper. Of course, make sure your caliper is zeroed out and take a measurement to the bottom of this gear as best as you can get it. It would probably be beneficial to put a straight edge across this bottom of the gear to make sure we are completely lined up correctly instead of just eyeballing it through a camera, which I am going to do that as soon as I put this camera down. But it looks like we are right around 4.00, which is right on the spec. But let me take a measurement with my free hand and this straight edge across the bottom of the gear here so I make sure I'm stopping the caliper at exactly the right point. I'm gonna do that off camera. Okay, upon remeasuring that length with the shaft pulled all the way out and using a straight edge across the back of the gear to stop the caliper when I was measuring across right here, I got 4.015. So it is right in the middle of the range where it's supposed to be. So for this being a cheap Chinese distributor, they've actually got the specs spot on both the in play, up and down, which is the vertical movement, and the depth of the mounting of the gears. So this thing is spot on. Now, where the problem will lie is whenever we knock this roll pin out and we take this gear off to remove the guts from the distributor and rebuild it, we have to try to get this gear at exactly the same spot, which you would think, hey, it's got a hole. As long as we line the hole up and put the pin back in, it should end up at exactly the same spot. And that's where the problem lies, because most of the time you can, especially on the press fit, you can never get the gear exactly lined back up with the pin. Especially on the Ford distributors, they have the gears pressed on. And what ends up having to happen is you end up turning the gear with the hole 90 degrees and drilling a new hole through the gear and the shaft to put the pin in once you've measured and set your depth exactly where you want it. Now I'm hoping that this gear is not pressed on that tight. And if that's the case, then I should be able to slide it right back on and put the pin right back in the same hole, because this measurement is dead on where I need it. On the one that's in my car right now, once I put the gear on, I used a Ford gear. I didn't use the same gear that came on the distributor, and the Ford gear had a little bit different depth. So I couldn't use the same hole that was already previously drilled. So I had to set it at 4.030 and then drill it and re-drill it 90 degrees from the current hole and then knock the pin in. So it works fine to do it that way. That is kind of the standard protocol to do that. I'm hoping I can get away with not doing that here on this distributor. I'm hoping that this gear is not pressed on too tight. The Ford gears are pressed on extremely tight. You have to use a gear puller. And what I was doing is I was heating the gear up with a torch to make it grow. And then trying to slam it on the shaft real quick before it cooled down. And it just would not do what I wanted it to do. I could never get it lined up on the hole exactly, so I just had to re-drill another hole. So I'm gonna start taking this thing apart, and we'll see what we get here. Now, what you're gonna want to do here is you're gonna have to knock this roll pin out to get this gear off. You're gonna have to knock this roll pin out to get this collar off. And so what I like to do is I like to mark them so I know the orientation of where I'm starting at. So I'll make sure I put it back on the same way. It probably really doesn't matter, but it's just something I like to do just to put it back exactly the way it came apart. So I like to mark the gear, mark the shaft, and then mark the collar. And then what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna use a small drift, a fine tipped drift, to knock these roll pins out of both of those. And I'm gonna sit the camera down so I can knock those out real quick, and we'll get right back to you. Okay, I got both of the roll pins knocked out, and let's see what we've got. How tight is this sucker? Ooh, it is very loose. Okay, so that's good and that's bad. The gear being loose on the shaft is good for removal purposes and rebuilding purposes. However, the point of the gear being pressed on the shaft is so that the roll pin is not taking all of the load that is being pushed against the gear from the oil pump turning, and running high viscosity oils and things like that. That puts a lot more load, high RPMs, puts a lot more load on the gear, on making the gear harder to turn. So the press fitment helps absorb some of that torque versus relying strictly on these little bitty roll pins. So that is kind of one thing that might be a problem with using these type distributors, but I haven't had a problem with mine yet. But that would just be, and these roll pins are another thing. These are not double walled roll pins like what's used in the Ford distributors. These are like a single kind of thin roll pin. So I might see if I can find another roll pin, an actual Ford roll pin that it's a little stronger than this. But we should be able to get this collar off, and this thing should come apart. And there we go. Nice shaft, slid right out. So now we will start taking off the module and this PIP sensor on the inside. Make note that there's a washer right here that just fell off, but it sits right there on the top of the bushing for the distributor shaft. So it actually will go right here on this shaft. So we need to make sure we do not lose that. That is part of what got us our excellent in-play clearance. If we lose that shim, we would have more in-play clearance, and our 20 to 30 thousandth spec might not be in spec. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this thing apart and then start slapping some parts in it. Just to show you, we have the cheap module that it comes with and the cheap black PIP sensor that it comes with. Module off. One thing to note, so this white grease is dielectric grease. And the purpose of that is to insulate heat from the module. And you can see that they have a very small amount of grease on there on this Chinese-made distributor here. So I won't be using this module, so I will be cleaning all this grease off. And then I will put a thick layer of good dielectric grease on when I put the new module on. I actually don't have another NOS Ford module here yet. I have this Motorcraft unit that I'm not going to use. I'm just going to keep that as my travel companion. But I do have another one of these NOS modules en route. I found another one on eBay. It's about 115 bucks, but I got one coming. And I'm hoping with those things that once we put them on, we don't have to touch them for many years. So, but one thing to just note that you need to put grease on this because that is what keeps the heat from zapping these modules. And as little grease that they have on here, I can see that being a root cause for burning up modules. Take the side screw out that holds this retainer pin in and slide that out. Then we can remove our screws that are holding, lost you there. Going to remove these screws that are holding the PIP module in, or the PIP sensor, I should say. And they definitely use cheaper hardware than what the Motorcraft distributors. These are all Phillips head screws, and the actual Motorcraft distributors had 5/32 hex head screws in them, but it's fine. These will work. Take that screw out. And here is the PIP module. It's another cheapie. Super cheap PIP module compared to the actual Ford modules. So I'm going to go ahead and put this sucker in. It's pretty tight fitting going in there. Go ahead and put the guide back in. That latches it down. Some of these can be a little tricky to get them. I'll take you a few tries, but. And you'll see once you slide this new PIP sensor in right here, you'll slide that latch assembly on, and it just kind of hangs over this male dowel. And then you just screw this into the side, and that's what locks it in place. Okay, so the latch assembly is now in, and we just got to put the screws in for the pickup. One thing to note is that when you're sliding this pickup module in, you have to get the bottom latch assembly to fit in that groove before you screw it in, or else you will have problems. Before you get the screw too tight, make sure you get the other screw started. Kind of tricky to get in there. It's easier if I had taken the lower distributor cap off. It would make it a little easier, but it's okay. We got it going. All right, there you go. So that is the Ford PIP sensor in there now. You can see the blue sensor. Got the locking plate on. The screw for the locking plate is right there. Got these screws in, everything's sitting flush. You want to make sure that you don't have your wires contacting the housing down the bottom right here. I like to kind of just move those out of the way, so make sure that they are not going to get pinched right here. And this thing is now ready to have the module put on once I get it. But we're going to go ahead and reassemble this thing. Go ahead and put the shaft back in it and start doing the game with the gear. Okay, I shot a little spot of oil on the shaft, slid the shaft in through the inside, and you want to spin it over and make sure everything is smooth and not making any contact. And then now it's time to try to slide these gears back on and see if the alignment is going to take place. So I'm going to go ahead and rig this thing up, put a little piece of wood. Actually, got to put our collar on first. I'll line up the lines on the collar. And then I'm going to grab my gear, grab the white section on the gear, and then we'll sit it down on the wood and see what we got. Okay, so it lined up super easy. I'm gonna see if I can find some Ford roll pins. I really don't want to use these roll pins. These things are so thin. I definitely do not trust those for as loose as the interference fit is with this gear. So let me see if I can find some pins. Okay, digging through my stash, I did manage to find a pin, and it's going to be hard to pick up on a video, but this pin is a double-walled pin, and it's considerably thicker than the pins that come in this thing, which are a single wall, very thin. There's actually a gap that you can see right through. These are super thin. I've only got one, so I'm going to use that on the gear side. I'll use this thin pin on the collar side because the collar is not really under any load. The gear side is the one that's under a bunch of load. So I'm going to go ahead and try to set these pins up and get them in, and I'll give you a rundown here shortly. I'm going to try to get you guys a better shot at this pin. I really want y'all to take notice of this double-walled pin. It's literally two roll pins inside of one, and that's going to add a good amount of strength to the capability of holding the gear in place, since it is not a compression fit or an interference fit gear on this particular shaft. If this was on a Ford distributor and you were pressing this gear back on, it would be no problem using the thinner pins. But since this is not an interference fit, I would prefer to use the double-walled roll pins. So just keep that in mind. If you decide to build one of these O'Reilly's distributors or AutoZone distributors, it's a WAI, I think is actually what the brand is. Try to source yourself a double wall pin just for some peace of mind, especially if this is going to be a car that you're going to be beating on a lot, high RPMs, or running thick grade oil in it. And there it is, boys. We got the gear back on. The white marks are lined up. I got the double wall roll pin in. See if I can kind of zoom in on that. So our spec should be the same. I'll go ahead and take another final measurement with the caliper. Make sure we're still in that 4.0 to 4.030 range, which it should be. And that'll be just about wrapping this one up. All right, that final measurement, as best as I can tell with the straight edge, got us at about a 4.038, which is right in spec. So we should be good to go on this. All I'm waiting for now is my new to me NOS Ford module to install this. I'm gonna go ahead and clean this dielectric grease off right here. So I'll be ready for when the new module gets here. And I will also likely put a Ford Motorcraft distributor cap and rotor on this one. But as you can see, we got the blue PIP sensor in there. And once we get the Ford module, you will basically have a brand new, for all intents and purposes, Ford distributor without all the sloppy shaft play that is associated with 35 to 40-year-old Motorcraft distributors. So it's pretty much going to be it for this video. I'll get this thing final assembled when the rest of the parts get here. And this one's just going to be a spare. And I'm just going to sit on this, and I'll have a potential new engine build in the works. And I'm going to be sending this distributor to Prestige Motorsports, who will be building a 347 for me most likely, and they will have a brand new distributor to dyno tune that engine with. So anyway, I hope this was helpful to some of you guys. I know that if you were doing this on an actual Ford distributor, there is more steps involved in regards to removing the gear. You have to use a gear puller, and you will also have to have some way to reinstall the gear without beating it on. They make special tools for that. The last Ford one I did, I actually just heated the gear up to about 500 degrees with the electric heat gun. And once I got it up to 500 degrees, it mostly slid on. It got within about 1/4 of an inch of where the roll pin alignment point was. And I was able to just tap it on with a hammer the rest of the way. The holes did not line up, as I mentioned earlier. So I just turned the gear 90 degrees and then re-drilled the gear and the shaft and ran a new pin in it. But if you use these O'Reilly's distributors, you don't have to do that. You can literally just slide the gear on and off, put you a good quality pin in, and you should be good to go. So I'm hopeful that this was helpful to some of you guys that have been left stranded with your Foxbody and not always known why. Let me just show you some of these part numbers. So if you want to get the Ford PIP sensor, this is the part number for you. This is an original NOS sensor from the 90s. This is an original Ford module box with a couple different part numbers. These are likely have been superseded, obviously, since these things are no longer even made by Ford anymore, the original Motorcraft ones. Here is the newer Motorcraft module part numbers. And these are likely probably good enough, but I have read online that they do have a pretty high failure rate compared to the old ones. So I keep these in the car as a spare. But for building these new distributors from scratch, I like to try to use these. It does cost you a little bit of money. You know, you're about $115 for an NOS module. I think I paid about $100 for the stator. And then of course, buying a new distributor is about $100. So you're easily going to be $350 or so into one of these things, especially once you buy a Motorcraft cap and rotor. But $350 for basically a brand new distributor that is exactly in the right spec with OEM Ford parts that'll probably last you many, many, many years. So as opposed to dealing with some of the aftermarket ones like the MSDs and the Excels and those that are also known to have a pretty high failure rate. So anyway, I hope this helps you guys out. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Catch you on the next one.